I didn't notice the book slipping from my hand until it hit the carpet with a muffled thud. What I noticed, what I couldn't stop noticing, was her. She stood just inside the doorway, half shadowed by the hall light, as though she hadn't decided if she should come in. Her sister, the one I was supposed to be tutoring, had gone upstairs to grab a notebook. That left only the two of us in the quiet living room. The silence stretched too long, until even the ticking clock on the wall seemed loud. She wasn't trying to look younger, not in the way some people did. Her blouse was simple, unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled neatly to the elbow. But there was a kind of grace in the way she leaned against the frame, poised, self-contained, like she was used to being looked at and had grown careful about what she gave away. "Sorry," I said, fumbling to pick up the book. "Clumsy." Her eyes followed the movement, then lingered when I sat back upright. She didn't smile exactly, but the corner of her mouth tipped as though she'd thought of something and chose not to say it. "You're patient with her," she murmured, her voice low. "She doesn't sit still for anyone else." I shrugged, though my throat felt too tight. "She just needs someone to listen while she figures it out." For a second, she looked at me differently. As though the words meant more than I'd intended. Her gaze stayed there, too long to be polite, and I caught myself holding it, waiting for her to blink first. The air felt warmer. Not from the radiator, not from anything real, just from how close she was now. She had stepped inside the room without my noticing, her hand trailing the edge of the table as she passed. The faintest brush of her fingertips grazed the back of my own hand resting on the wood. A mistake, maybe. Except she didn't move it away right away. I swallowed. My pen hovered over the page of half-finished equations. She's doing better," I said, though my voice cracked. "You're good at this," she replied, softly. Her tone wasn't about math at all. The clock ticked again. She looked down at the notes, but her eyes didn't focus. She was closer now, leaning slightly, the faint citrus of her perfume threading the space between us. My chest tightened, not with panic but with something harder to steady. I wanted to say something. Anything. But her presence drew the words out of me before I could catch them. You shouldn't be standing there. It's distracting." Her eyebrows lifted, just a flicker. "Distracting?" Heat spread across my neck. "I just mean," the words failed. She tilted her head, the kind of gesture that felt like she was measuring me. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. I noticed her hand again, how close it still was to mine, the subtle tremor in her fingers like she wasn't as steady as she looked. Her lips parted, the faintest breath escaping. "You're teaching me more than you should," she whispered. The words landed like they weren't meant to be heard aloud. Before I could answer, before I could even breathe properly, the front door creaked open. Her sister's voice carried down the hall, careless and too loud. The woman drew her hand back. Too quick. Too practiced. She turned her head toward the sound, but not before I caught the sharp flicker in her eyes, something unguarded, something she wasn't ready to name. And then she was stepping away, leaving only the warmth of her nearness behind, as though nothing had happened at all. The next week, I found myself arriving early. I told myself it was habit, or that traffic had been lighter than usual, but the truth sat heavier in my chest. I wanted to see if she'd be there again. Her sister was late, still upstairs when I set out my notes at the dining table. The house was quiet in that half-lived-in way, shadows along the walls, the faint hum of a refrigerator, the smell of fresh coffee somewhere close. And then she appeared, carrying 2 mugs. "You're early," she said, setting one in front of me before sitting down across the table. Her voice was calm, like she'd expected me. I wrapped my hands around the cup, too aware of how recently her fingers had touched it. "Guess I misjudged the bus schedule." Her laugh was short, quiet, but it stayed in the air longer than it should have. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, then rested her chin lightly on her palm. She wasn't studying the cup. She was studying me. I tried to look away, but my eyes betrayed me, catching the soft lines at the corners of hers, the way her collar slipped just enough to reveal the curve of her shoulder. She carried herself like someone who had been looked at her whole life, but right now she seemed to be waiting for me to say something. I didn't. Instead, she broke the silence. "You remind me of someone." I looked up. "Who?" Her lips pressed together, as if she regretted starting. "No one you'd know." Then, after a pause, "It's been a long time since I had anyone sit here and listen." I didn't know what to say to that. The words felt personal, too bare, yet she'd left them on the table between us as if daring me to pick them up. So I asked quietly, "You don't have someone to talk to?" Her eyes flickered, a small recoil she tried to hide. She straightened her posture, wrapping both hands around her cup. "Not in the way that matters." The room felt smaller then. I thought of the stories I'd overheard, how she'd married young, how the separation had been quiet but permanent. Her sister had mentioned it once in passing, like it was old news, but sitting across from her now, I could see the weight of it still pressed on her. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said suddenly, though her gaze didn't leave mine. I blinked. "Like what?" "Like you see something you shouldn't." The words lodged in my throat. I shifted, gripping my pen though I wasn't writing anything. "You're not just anything," she cut in, softer now. "You're young. You should be," she trailed off, shaking her head. Her hand drifted toward mine, stopped just shy of touching, then curled into a fist against the table. I wanted to bridge that space. Instead, I forced myself to look down at the page. "It doesn't feel wrong to talk to you," I murmured. Her breath caught. A tiny sound, almost a sigh. She leaned in without meaning to, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath against my temple as she glanced at the notebook. The scent of coffee mixed with the faint citrus I remembered from last time. Her shoulder brushed mine. Just for a moment, but the contact burned through the thin fabric of my sleeve. Neither of us moved away right away. Then her sister's footsteps pounded down the stairs, breaking the spell. The woman pulled back smoothly, a practiced motion, but I caught the quickness of her pulse at her neck, the faint flush rising to her cheeks. I closed the notebook, pretending to organize my notes, though my hand shook slightly. She stood, gathering the empty cups. As she passed behind me, her hand brushed my shoulder, light, almost nothing, but enough to freeze me in place. I glanced up at her. She didn't look back. But the smallest pause in her step, the faintest press of her fingers against the fabric of my shirt, told me it wasn't an accident. And then she was gone, leaving me with the warmth of that touch, my heart pounding too hard to focus on anything else. The house was too quiet that evening. Her sister had stepped out to run an errand, promising she'd be back before we'd even made it through half a chapter. That left the two of us alone again. I spread the notes across the table, though neither of us seemed to care about them tonight. She lingered nearby, not sitting, pacing slowly as though trying to convince herself she wasn't restless. "You shouldn't always come so early," she said finally, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Do you not want me to?" Her lips parted, but the answer stalled. "It's not about wanting." The air thickened. I bent my head toward the page, but my hand didn't move. I felt her stop behind me, close enough that her presence shifted the air. The faintest brush of fabric grazed my shoulder. I turned, too quick, and found her face inches from mine. Neither of us spoke. Her breath stirred the air between us, uneven, betraying what her voice kept hidden. A sound cut through, the vibration of her phone on the counter. She startled, stepping back as though burned, snatching it up. Her voice was steady when she answered, but I saw the tremor in her hand. "Just a neighbor asking about the mail." "Nothing." But the interruption left her rattled. She set the phone down with care, then forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We should get back to it. I nodded, though my pulse was still hammering. I couldn't shake the closeness, the warmth that had almost bridged the impossible space. We tried to read. Tried. But every time she leaned over my shoulder to glance at the page, the edge of her sleeve brushed my arm, the fall of her hair nearly touching my cheek. Every movement was too much and not enough. You keep staring at the same line, she murmured finally, catching me. I can't concentrate, I admitted, voice low. Her eyes flickered. Then maybe we should stop. The words should have ended it. Instead, they left us suspended, silence pressing in. I let out a shaky breath. You don't actually want me to stop, do you? She froze. A muscle in her jaw tightened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, so softly I barely caught it, don't ask questions you already know the answers to. The room spun smaller. My hand shifted without thought, resting on the table, closer to hers than it should have been. She didn't move away. The sound of keys rattling at the front door sent a jolt through both of us. Her sister's voice floated in, casual, humming. In one swift motion, the woman pulled her chair back, straightening the pages on the table with forced precision. I followed her lead, scribbling nonsense numbers across the margin just as her sister appeared in the doorway. Everything good? The younger girl asked, oblivious. Fine, the woman answered, her tone clipped but steady. She didn't look at me. Not once. We stumbled through the rest of the lesson, words falling flat, gestures rehearsed. But when her sister left the room again, I caught it, the brief flick of her gaze, sharp and unguarded, locking with mine. It lasted only a second. But in that second, every unsaid word, every nearly crossed line, every tremor of restraint tightened between us like a rope pulled taut. And I knew we were already closer than we should be. Closer than either of us was ready to admit. By the fourth lesson that week, she wasn't pretending anymore. Not really. Her sister had left early for a study group, and we were alone in the kitchen. The note sat untouched between us, the pencil rolling back and forth like even it knew we were lying to ourselves. You're quiet tonight, I said. She looked up sharply, then softened. I shouldn't even be in here with you. You always say that, I murmured. Because it's always true. Her hand pressed flat to the table, as though steadying herself. Do you know what people would think? I leaned forward, pulse quick in my throat. Do you care what people think? Her breath hitched. She looked away, but not fast enough for me to miss it, the raw flash in her eyes, a mix of longing and fear. I stood, moving around the table. She didn't move as I stopped beside her chair. She sat very still, as though the slightest motion might break her resolve. You shouldn't, she whispered, though her voice lacked force. I bent, close enough to see the fine strands of hair framing her face. Slowly, without thinking, I reached out and brushed them back, my fingers grazing the warmth of her temple. Her eyes fluttered shut. Don't, she said again, but this time it sounded like a plea. My hand lingered at her cheek. I could feel the faint tremor beneath her skin, the way her breath caught and released unevenly. I can't stop thinking about you, I said, the words spilling before I could pull them back. Her head tilted slightly, as though the confession struck a place she kept locked. When she opened her eyes, they shimmered with something unspoken. You're too young to know what you want. I swallowed hard. I know I want this. The silence stretched, charged, unbearable. She rose slowly, and for the first time, we stood nearly chest to chest. The citrus of her perfume wrapped around me, dizzying. Her hand lifted, hovering just shy of my shirt, trembling with hesitation. Do you have any idea, she whispered, her lips so close I could feel the brush of her breath, what you're asking me to risk? Yes, I answered, voice low. But do you? Her hand pressed lightly against my chest then, not pushing me away, just resting there. My heart thundered against her palm. She looked up, searching my face, as though waiting for me to falter. I didn't. Her resolve cracked. I saw it in the way her shoulders loosened, in the way her body leaned ever so slightly into mine. We were suspended, one breath apart, the world narrowing to the possibility of a kiss that felt inevitable, unstoppable. Her lips parted. My hand slid to the back of her neck, gentle, certain. And then, a sharp knock rattled the front door. We froze. Her hand dropped. I let go as though burned. The knock came again, louder this time. A voice, male, familiar, called her name. She stepped back fast, pressing a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with something like panic. I stood rooted, pulse still hammering, the ghost of her nearness burning across my skin. And before either of us could move, she turned toward the hall, whispering only one word, so soft, so desperate, I almost missed it. Later. The knock at the door had been from her neighbor, a man too familiar with her smile, too comfortable lingering in the doorway. I'd gathered my notes quickly, feigning distraction, but every nerve in me strained as I watched them speak in hushed tones. She laughed once, politely, her hand hovering at the doorframe as though ready to shut it. When she returned, her expression was carefully arranged, a mask of composure. "Sorry," she said briskly, sliding back into the kitchen. "He likes to check on me." Her choice of words struck me, check on me, not visit. It sounded suffocating. "Does he always come around like that?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp. "Why?" I shrugged, though my chest burned. "He looked at you like what?" The silence filled with tension. I swallowed. "Like he thinks you're his." Her lips parted, then pressed shut. For the first time, she didn't have a ready answer. She turned from me, setting a mug into the sink with more force than necessary. "He's harmless," she muttered, but her shoulders stiffened. I didn't believe her. And worse, I didn't like the way my stomach knotted at the thought of anyone else claiming space near her. I rose slowly, the chair scraping the floor. "You don't seem so sure." She turned then, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something closer to defense. "And what would you have me do?" The words hit deeper than I expected. I stepped closer, until the heat of her body pulsed against mine, until her arms, tight across her chest, became more of a shield than a stance. Her breath caught. Her gaze flicked down, just for a second, before locking back on mine. "You don't get to be jealous," she said, barely above a whisper. "Then why do I feel like you want me to be?" Her breath trembled out of her. Her arms loosened, falling slowly to her sides. I could see the fight flickering in her eyes, the push and pull of something she'd been holding too long. Then she spoke, quiet and raw, "Because you see me. And I haven't been seen in years." The word struck like a confession. She looked away instantly, as though she hadn't meant to let them out. I reached for her hand, hesitant. My fingertips brushed her knuckles. She didn't move away. Not this time. But even as her hand warmed beneath mine, the sound of her sister's voice echoed from upstairs. A sudden creak of floorboards, footsteps heading toward the landing. We froze, still joined, the risk slamming into both of us. Her hand trembled under mine. "She'll know," she whispered, eyes wide, panic threading her voice. "Then don't let go," I whispered back. She did let go, but only to step past me, brushing against me too closely, her shoulder grazing my chest as she turned toward the stairs. Her scent lingered, her warmth clinging to my skin. "Later," she'd said before. This time, she didn't repeat it. But her pause at the doorway, her hand gripping the frame tight enough to whiten her knuckles, said more than words could. I stayed rooted to the floor, heart pounding, the weight of her confession ringing in my head. She hadn't denied me. She hadn't pushed me out. She'd admitted it, what I already knew, what she'd fought to bury. And now, the risk wasn't just about what people would think. It was about the truth neither of us could take back. By the time her sister appeared, all chatter and brightness, the woman had already composed herself. She moved past me briskly, almost too briskly, but as she did, her fingers brushed mine in the smallest, most deliberate slip of contact. It lasted no more than a heartbeat. But it was a decision. A promise. And I knew then, we were no longer circling the edge. We were already falling. It happened on a rainy evening. The kind of night when the world outside seemed blurred, softened, as though it had stepped back to let something else unfold. Her sister had cancelled at the last minute, some excuse about staying over with a friend. That left me alone at the table, my notes spread out but useless, when she walked in. No pretense tonight. No mug in her hand, no mask of distance. She stood there, watching me, rain-damp hair clinging to her temple. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but the words lacked weight. I pushed back from the table, standing. "Then tell me to go." Her breath hitched. She didn't. The silence between us thickened, pulsing with every unspoken thought we'd been dodging for weeks. I stepped toward her slowly. She stayed where she was, her hand gripping the back of a chair as though to anchor herself. "You think I don't feel it too?" she whispered, finally breaking. Her voice trembled. "Every time you look at me like I'm not invisible anymore, every time I almost forget how wrong this is." I reached her then, my hand brushing her arm. She shivered at the contact, eyes fluttering shut, jaw tightening as though holding herself together. "Then stop pretending," I said softly. Her eyes opened, wide, raw, unguarded. She lifted a hand, hesitated, then let it rest against my chest. My heart pounded beneath her palm, too loud, too certain. "We can't," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. "We already have," I murmured. My hand rose, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. My thumb lingered at her cheekbone, warm against her cool skin. She leaned into it. Just barely, but enough. Her lips parted, her breath mingling with mine. The air between us collapsed until there was nothing left to hide behind. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice breaking. "So am I." For a long, fragile second, we hovered on the edge, her hand gripping my shirt now, my forehead nearly touching hers, the rain tapping steadily against the glass behind us. The pull between us was undeniable, dangerous, magnetic. And then she exhaled, a sound halfway between surrender and relief. She leaned closer, closing the space until there was no doubt left. Our lips brushed, not fully, not yet, but the contact was enough to shatter whatever walls we'd kept. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, holding me there. I felt her tremble, and I realized I was trembling too. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, raw, unsteady, like we'd both forgotten how to be this close to another person. When we finally drew back, just an inch, her forehead rested against mine. Her breath was shaky, her voice barely a whisper. "Now you know." I nodded, my chest tight. "And now you do too." We stood there, suspended, rain streaking down the window, the world still blurred outside. Nothing else mattered, no neighbor, no sister, no whispers of judgment. Only the clarity between us. We wanted this, wanted each other, no longer hidden in silence. For the first time, we both stopped pretending. The storm had passed by morning, but its echo lingered in the house. The smell of rain still clung to the air, windows fogged at the corners. We hadn't kissed again after that first trembling touch. We hadn't needed to. The silence between us had been fuller than words. Now she sat at the table, cradling a mug, her hair pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her face. The light from the window caught her in a way that felt almost unfair, like time itself had slowed to watch her. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, her voice low. kept thinking about what we've done. About what it means. I sat across from her, hands folded, resisting the urge to reach out. And? Her eyes lifted to mine. She held the gaze longer this time, not running from it. It scares me, she said simply. Not the way you look at me, God, that makes me feel alive. But what comes after? What people will say. What it might do to you. I let the silence sit a moment before answering. It's not their life. It's mine. And you're not, some mistake I'll regret. You're the first thing that feels real. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the mug down. You make it sound easy. I shook my head. It's not easy. It's worth it. She leaned back, exhaling slowly, as though weighing years of restraint against the weight of the present moment. Then, softly, do you know how long it's been since I let someone close? I reached across the table then, not rushing, not pushing, just laying my hand over hers. Her skin was warm, fingers tightening instinctively around mine. Maybe too long, I whispered. Her eyes softened. A small laugh escaped her, almost self-conscious. You shouldn't be the one teaching me how to risk again. Maybe I'm the only one who can. We sat like that, hands tangled, the quiet wrapping around us. She shifted finally, coming around the table. When she stopped beside me, I thought she might speak again, but instead she lowered herself into the chair next to mine. Close enough that our shoulders touched. She leaned into me then, just slightly, her head resting against my shoulder. The weight of her felt grounding, not heavy. I turned, pressing a careful kiss to her forehead. She let out a soft breath, almost a sigh, and in that sound I heard something breaking open, fear loosening, walls falling. Her hand slid into mine again, fingers lacing, firm this time. Not tentative. Not hidden. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I smiled faintly, my voice low against her hair. We don't have to. We just have to stop pretending it isn't happening. She tilted her face up toward me, her eyes searching, but no longer running. And in that look, I saw it clearly, the end of hesitation, the beginning of something neither of us had expected but both of us had already chosen. We stayed like that, pressed close, the quiet no longer awkward but full, two people who had stopped fighting what was already theirs. For the first time, there was no need to say later.